Greetings everyone, and today I'm testing out an exciting new super telephoto zoom lens for Sony's full-frame mirrorless cameras, the Sony 400-800mm f6.3-8 G OSS. I'd like to thank Sony UK for loaning me one of these lenses for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review and they had no input into the video at all. Its price will be about £2,500 here in the UK. I'll put full pricing information in the description below. So it's pretty expensive, but then again, serious wildlife and nature photographers will do anything to get to that magical and rare 800mm focal length, and it can accept Sony's teleconverters too, which are sold separately. A zoom range of 400 to 800mm is of course a super long telephoto reach all the way, and the slightly dark maximum aperture of f6.3 to f8, while a bit tricky to work with, does at least mean that the lens can be somewhat portable, so it's a useful option for wildlife photography or even taking on safari. It's handy to zoom out to 400mm to look around for a subject and then zoom into it when one shows up. Its darker maximum aperture does mean it would be a bit of a pain to use for sports photography. I wouldn't try that, and if you're shooting on a cloudy day, you might need quite high ISO levels for just about any photography you're trying to do. Still though, 800mm, fun and useful. This particular lens sports excellent build quality. The lens's barrel is solid and made of a mixture of metal and heavy-duty plastic. It's a bit heavier than it looks though, tipping the scales at about 2.5 kilograms with the tripod mount, or nearly 6 pounds. Carrying this thing around for long periods is no joke, but I have handled worse. It's based on a metal lens mount with weather sealing, and as I mentioned, there's room in there to use Sony's 1.4x and 2x teleconverters as well, which are sold separately. The lens has its own image stabilization system, which is particularly important as your camera's internal stabilization isn't very effective at long focal lengths. Here's some footage with stabilization turned off and now turned on, and as you can see it helps quite a bit, although at 800mm your footage obviously won't be stable enough for handheld video work. The lens features a lot of controls on the side for focus and image stabilization, so thankfully you don't have to keep digging through the camera's menu system to change things. The focus limiter switch will be especially helpful, but don't forget it if you've left it on. The lens also comes with an adjustable and removable tripod mount, which I found nice and strong and sturdy. Then comes a rubberized focus ring. It turns extremely smoothly and it adjusts your focus very responsively. As you can see here, whether you're zoomed in or zoomed out, the lens doesn't really suffer from focus breathing. Your field of view stays about the same wherever you're focused. The lens's autofocus motor is nice and quick and pretty accurate in use. I had no problems with the lens's autofocus system at all, and in autofocus continuous mode it ran even faster. Next comes the lens's zoom ring, which turns very smoothly without any stickiness to it. It's not too heavy to turn, although I wish it had a slightly shorter throw to it so you can snap zoom in and out to the birds you're trying to shoot. Something nice to see is the lens's internal zoom mechanism. Other super telephoto zoom lenses from third parties extend and contract as you zoom in and out, making them more likely to collect dust within their optics. The lens's filter thread size is 105mm, so filters will obviously cost a lot of money, and it comes with a fairly deep lens hood. Overall, we are dealing with awesome build quality here, although I did find the lens a bit heavy to use, and I wish its image stabilization was just a touch steadier. Alright, let's take a look at image quality now. We'll start with a full frame camera, my 42MP Sony a7R III. In-camera corrections are turned on for these tests. At 400mm and f6.3, we see great sharpness in the middle of your images, but contrast is just okay here. Stop down to f8 and contrast becomes excellent too. Anyway, let's open back up to f6.3 and take a look over in the image corners. Good news here, sharpness remains very good. Contrast is just okay, and there's a touch of colour fringing to be seen, but the resolution is certainly there. Stop down to f8 for an image with just a tiny bit more bite to its contrast, and f11 actually looks slightly better again, although diffraction is robbing us of the very finest edge of sharpness. Alright, let's zoom into 800mm then. At f8 there's plenty of sharpness and great contrast to be seen here. It's a touch better than at 400mm actually, and that is as sharp as the lens gets in the middle. Over in the corners we're seeing a slightly softer image with slightly lower contrast, but everything's still looking fairly dandy to me. If you stop down to f11 then the image just starts getting softer due to diffraction. Overall, while the lens isn't giving a perfect performance, it's still very good. Plenty of sharpness can be seen here, although I wish it had just a touch more contrast to it in places. How about on a 24MP APS-C camera then? Let's take a look. At 400mm and f6.3, again, we are seeing very good sharpness in the middle, but contrast is a bit low. Let's look over into the corners. Same thing, sharpness very good, contrast okay. Stop down to f8 though, and as before, contrast gets a lot stronger and we see a bit more sharpness too, from the corners and back into the middle. Cool. Let's zoom into 800mm now, where at f8 sharpness and contrast are still very good, but only just. I think we're brushing against the limits of the lens's capacity here. Over in the corners, sharpness is still just about good. As before, stop down to f11 and softness begins to creep in due to diffraction. So, on a 24MP APS-C camera, the lens is just about resolving good sharpness still, but it's right at its limits. Alright, let's turn off in-camera corrections and take a look at distortion and vignetting. At 400mm, the lens projects moderately strong pincushion distortion, although vignetting is surprisingly low here. As you zoom all the way into 800mm, that pincushion distortion remains, although vignetting does get more noticeable at f8. Stop down to f11 and those corners brighten up. The lens's minimum focus distance is 1.7 meters at the wide end and 3.5 when zoomed in. That sounds pretty far, but you're still able to get very close to your subject here, and for closest results do shoot at 400mm. At f6.3, close-up sharpness remains good, but we see a surprising level of purple fringing. Stop down to f8 and that close-up image quality becomes noticeably sharper and cleaner. Let's see how well the lens works against bright lights now. At wide angles there are very few issues, little in the way of flaring or glaring or loss of contrast. Zoom in and bright lights still will only cause an issue when directly in your image or right on the edge, so generally the lens is grasping hold of its contrast very well here. And finally, bokeh. This lens might only have quite a dark maximum aperture, but when working at such extreme telephoto ranges, it's still quite easy to get out of focus backgrounds, and there are really no problems here at all. Those backgrounds look lovely and soft, even the more difficult ones. Overall, the Sony FE 400 to 800mm lens is one that any wildlife photographer would be pretty happy to have in their arsenal. It's sharp, with good build quality, and weather sealing. It produces consistently nice images, although you'll still want to shoot at quite high ISO levels with it. I found it to be a bit of a heavy lens to use though, at 2.5 kilograms, so personally I'd prefer to shoot with Sony's 200 to 600mm lens instead, which is also a bit cheaper. But for anyone needing 800mm, this is a great way to get there, so the lens does still come recommended. Thanks for watching everyone. I love the pictures these crazy long telephoto optics can get you, even if they're hard work for me to test out. If you regularly find yourself watching these reviews, then check out my Patreon page. There, supporters of this channel get all kinds of extra bonus content. Ciao for now.